Recent fluctuations in Chinese markets have created a bit of a Chicken Little mentality among U.S. investors. But is the sky really falling? Well, if it's your retirement or your livelihood, you might think so and be asking, should I stay or should I go? We're going to be talking with economist David Beckworth. And later in the program, we're going to take a closer look at events on the education front. As it turns out, we have the results of implementation of a statewide teacher evaluation system. And while the numbers are in, the results have some in the education business giving it a failing grade. Stay tuned. Outlook is next. Hello and welcome to Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb. This is WKU PBS's weekly public affairs installment, and we are Talking Heads on a mission. Our mission is to educate, enlighten, and inform. On the cutting board today, we're going to be talking about the economy. All right. There's a familiar refrain among investors. It goes something like this: should I stay or should I go? Should I get into the market, out of the market? Well, all of this has to do with the recent roller coastering by the Chinese government. It has repercussions across the global market. We're going to take a little bit closer look as we welcome to the program David Beckworth, who's with WKU's economics department. Thanks for being here, David.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, again, that familiar refrain, should I stay or should I go? And if you're watching this program, you're probably in this central region, and you're probably wondering, does what's happening in the Chinese market really affect the people of South Central Kentucky? But it does, doesn't it?
It does to some extent. However, the outlook for the U.S. economy is more optimistic than what's going on in China. If you want to understand what's going on in China, there's a backstory that kind of makes it more clear for the implications here.
Well, but what I have to start off with is what people may not realize is that the way they do business in China is very different than the way we do things here in the U.S.
Sure, definitely. The government's a lot more involved in the economy over there, and some of what we're seeing now is a consequence of that. So the backstory is that for the past 30 years, China's been growing rapidly. They've grown around 10% a year. And we've averaged 2.7% a year. So we get thrilled if we hit 3.5%. But they've been growing,
they're growing 10%
a year.
Wow.
Now that's kind of catch-up growth. They're picking the low-hanging fruit of economic growth. They're going from a poor country to a more modern economy. And it's easy to grow rapidly in those conditions. They're slowly transforming them into a more advanced economy, modern economy. And when that happens, your growth naturally tends to slow down. You go from industrialization to more of a service-driven economy.
Can I ask this? Is it more like the old China versus the new China? Are we kind of looking at it in those terms?
Well, there's a transition between those two Chinas. So China has grown rapidly, and it's important for the people in power for it to continue to grow rapidly because there's mass migrations going on from rural China, the old China, into the cities. Okay. And so rapid growth has been essential for them. And the problem is their growth is slowing down. And so what's occurred recently is just the latest manifestation of that. So their growth has been slowing down for years. And then in 2008, another important development was this global economic slowdown. It affected the U.S., affected Europe. China was different than any other major economy back then. It massively intervened, and the government spent a lot. Between now and then, they've built roads. You may have heard some of the cities they built where no one lives. They built them ahead of time. They built super funded highways. A lot of infrastructure was built, and some of it's been used, but some of it's still there. There's a lot of overcapacity. Just an interesting fact, between 2011 and 2013, they poured more cement in China than we poured during the entire century, 1900s here in the U.S. So
that's something that one has to ponder for a minute. But now, like in the U.S., where we get reports often about payroll or household surveys, you know, they'll say the latest economic survey, but China doesn't do anything like that. So how are we to know what they're doing, if you will?
Well, they do have statistics, they have GDP data, but it's true people don't trust it as much as we do in the U.S. And there's political reasons for that. So there's other indicators people look at. They look at things like the amount of construction going on, the amount of freight that's being used, the amount of electricity consumption. There are other indicators, and all those point to a slowdown. The stock market turbulence, what this all leads to, is a byproduct of that. The government decided it needed to do something else to kind of distract the public from what's going on.
The Chinese government.
The Chinese government. And so it actively encouraged people to get into the stock market. Between summer of 2014 and 2015, the Chinese stock market grew 150%, more than, they doubled. So people got into it. The government was cheerleading, it encouraged them, and then it's come crashing down. And a lot of people feel burned, betrayed by the government. And the latest manifestation is actually closely tied to what's going on in the U.S. So kind of a reverse your question, the events in the U.S. have been affecting China in a strange way. The Federal Reserve is talking about raising interest rates.
In the U.S.? In
the U.S. And as a consequence, it's caused panic other places in the world, including China. So China's problems are both long-term problems, the slowdown of its economy, the involvement of the government in propping up the stock market, and now the Federal Reserve tightening the U.S. So all these things are coming together. There is a massive blow-up over there. As you know, the stock market was rattled here in the U.S., around the world, but it is beginning to settle down. And I think over the long run, for most people, it probably won't be a big dent in their portfolios if they're in it for the long run. If you're in it for the short run, if you're about to retire soon, you may need to be paying more attention. But everything is looking upbeat for the U.S. economy. We just had GDP numbers come out that were really great.
Gross domestic product.
Gross domestic product. The number of jobs being created, they're creating 246,000 jobs a month on average over the past year. There's a lot of good signs about our economy going forward. So there has been some loss of wealth in the U.S. from the stock market tumbles. But going forward, I wouldn't be too worried about it. What I would be worried about is if China continues to struggle and let's say the Eurozone buckles again. The Eurozone's always on the edge. They have a lot of problems over there. Mm-hmm. If both of those went under, then I'd be more concerned. But a lot of good signs in the U.S. economy at this point.
Well, now, we in the U.S. now have safeguards, if you will, on the stock market safeguards, that we can shut down the market if we have to slow things down. China has no such mechanism, do they?
They have a different kind of mechanism. It's called the Communist Party. And there's some really bizarre or maybe common uses of it. So after the stock market crashed, they went after people who they called disturbers of the stock market. So journalists have been put in jail. They've actually, threatened.
For reporting what was happening.
They told people you can't sell your stocks. I mean, by decree, you cannot sell stocks. So they're intervening. We have circuit breakers you're talking about, at the New York Stock Exchange. We shut it down. They intervene in a very different and unpredictable manner. And so the difference is if it's unpredictable, it's ad hoc, it creates more uncertainty. Where here we know what's going to happen. And so that then further unrattles investors. And interestingly, a lot of the money that's leaving China because of this is coming to the U.S.
So the scenario is a tightening or a loosening? Or, what actually is China doing? Because it seems to be doing a little bit of both.
On one hand, it is trying to loosen internally. It's trying to stimulate its own economy, but it's linked to the dollar. Its currency is linked to the dollar, which means it's actually linked to whatever the Federal Reserve does. So it is, in effect, being tightened by what the Federal Reserve does in the U.S., but inside it's trying to offset that. And again, in the background, the fundamentals, the underlying trend growth in the Chinese economy is slowing down. And it's having a hard time. I mean, really, the leadership in China is making it up as it goes along. I mean, any economy that big, that many people, it's just way too complicated to nail down what the next move should be.
So for people watching this in South Central Kentucky, or if you're watching it online, and you might ask economist David Beckworth, so remain calm, don't panic?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, the outlook for this year's economy in the U.S. is great. Not great, it's definitely better than many other places. The one place in the world where economists are hopeful that will pull the global economy forward is the U.S. So Europe is barely moving. China's in a slowdown. The U.S. is the one bright spot.
Now, also, I would like to ask you, people, these things can be overwhelming. Okay, when you think about the economy and this, and they're creating money and they're taking money. But for the average citizen, what words of wisdom would you have to learn more about the economy? Is it really all about supply and demand?
At some level it is, but obviously it gets more complicated as you think about more moving parts. But for the average person, I would sit back again, Take a long view. Based on your age, your risk preference, your portfolio should be balanced accordingly. And I'm sure there's many good financial advisors who can point you in that direction. But the China turmoil, while it has put a dent in our market and has given us some pause, is not going to be a killer long run. I think we're going to continue to see the stock market settle down and continue to grow over the next few years.
All right, good advice. We've been talking with WKU economist David Beckworth. Now, what about our schools? How are our teachers doing? Well, we'll find out when Outlook continues right after this. Outlook continues, and now we're going to be talking about things on the education front. Are U.S. schools too focused on standardized testings? And recently we got results of Kentucky's pilot program looking at statewide teacher evaluation, and some are saying the grades are not so good. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that as we welcome two individuals in the know. Dr. Margarita DeSander joins us. She is the head of the Educational Administration, Leadership, and Research Department at Western. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
inviting me. That's a big
me.
title. In addition, Dr. Gary Houchins joined us. He's a regular on this program, also with that same department. So let's jump right in, okay? First of all, we need to talk about the results of this pilot, this one-year pilot. So give us a brief background, if you will, what we were looking at and how it turned out.
Sure. Well, Kentucky, like a lot of states, has had sort of a historical issue with teacher evaluation in the sense that teachers all tended to be evaluated with the highest marks possible, regardless of their real performance level. And that's not to say that we don't have a lot of terrific teachers around the Commonwealth, but the goal should be that we use teacher evaluation to help identify the training needs that teachers really need to continue to improve their practice. And when all teachers are rated at a high level, it doesn't give us the data that we need about what they actually need to continue to improve. And so Kentucky, like a lot of other states, launched a new teacher evaluation system that was to be more rigorous, it was to be more complex, and it was to provide more nuanced data that would tell us the differences between which teachers really are high performing and which need to continue to grow.
So the numbers came in, yes, the Kentucky teachers do well, but this begs the question, is it the system of evaluation? Is it the way in which these numbers were put together or the way they were asked?
That's a really good question. And part of the problem when we look at teacher evaluation is the fact that we have one individual or maybe two or three individuals at the most in the building evaluating 50, 60, sometimes over 100 individuals in a building. And when you have that kind of span of control, it's very difficult for individuals to have the kinds of conversations that they need in order to help teachers determine what their needs are, where their areas are for improvement, and then developing a plan for them to move forward to do that. You tend to spend more time with individuals who need more help, and individuals who are at the higher end of the scale don't have the same kinds of opportunities for conversations with their administrators. So it really, I think, is significantly a time issue. It's not training for administrators. I think we've done a pretty good job in Kentucky training people with the new PGES system. I think the real issue that we're dealing with is not having enough time each and every day to spend in the classroom and then to spend having those really serious conversations with teachers about what their needs are.
Almost peer conversations, and you reference PGES, Professional Growth and Effectiveness System is what the reference is there. So that having been said, where do we stand with this? Because we have an outgoing education secretary in the state of Kentucky. He's announced his retirement, and when he saw these results, he kind of took some action.
He did. It turned out that in our statewide pilot, 93.5% of our teachers were rated as effective or highly effective. So really less than 7% were identified as being ineffective or developing. And developing is a category that we would expect a lot of teachers new in their career to be, and even some veteran teachers in certain aspects of their practice might continue to be developing. So Commissioner Holliday recommended to the State Board of Education that we delay inclusion of the new teacher evaluation system into our school accountability model, because under present regulation, we were going to start seeing those results factor into schools' performance ratings starting next year. And so I think the commissioner and the board recognized that those ratings are so high that they indicate that more development is needed on the part of helping principals use the system to deliver accurate feedback, and possibly even adjustments in the structure of the system itself that would make it more useful and practical for principals to really give the feedback that the teachers need.
This is one of those rare occasions when maybe I can use this, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, so where do we, what do? We regroup, we go back,
Well, I don't think that we do throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that we have a strong system for evaluating our teachers. I think we need to go back and think about the purpose of evaluation more seriously. In the past, it's been used as a punitive measure in some instances where we want to find people who aren't doing well, and that's not the purpose of evaluation. The purpose of evaluation is really to help individuals grow, and I don't think that we've changed that paradigm. We've changed the system that we use, but the mindset, the paradigm has not caught up with that change. So that's going to take some time, and it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen after a year after a pilot. It happens after a series of years where we have an opportunity to go back, take a look at the data, and make adjustments.
But in the interim, the student in the classroom who's looking to this teacher to be enlightened and educated, what happens? Are we losing something between the cracks there?
Well, certainly we've got a lot more work to do to make sure that those teachers are getting the feedback that they need to really deliver the best learning experience possible for students. And we know that when we look at our achievement data, for all the gains that Kentucky has made, we still have about half of our students who are not proficient in reading and math. And so there are a lot of variables that go into that, but we know that the one and most important variable that we can control is the quality of the teaching experience that happens in that classroom. And so it's imperative that we continue to work on this system and improve it for the benefit of those students who are sitting there.
Well, we're talking about students now. If you've been a student, the standardized tests, right? For some, we excel. For others, it's just a real challenge. But we're hearing a lot these days about standardized testing, and maybe too much from some. Your opinion?
I'm not a proponent of standardized testing. I think that we spend far too much time focusing on standardized testing than we actually do learning in the classroom. And I think we spend a lot of time teaching to a test. That is not always an appropriate thing for us to do, and we overlook so much of what we can help students with in terms of their own personal growth and understanding, because we're spent worrying about, are we going to pass this test? Are we going to make this benchmark? And what are our scores going to look like?
Well, and what she's talking about, and that's imperative to understand when you talk about standardized tests, is that there are benchmarks, and there are certain schools and school systems are held to certain standards, if you will.
And I think the stress is enormous on teachers to do that. And so, I am not a proponent of it. I think that we need to look more at other models. The Finland Model is one model that I think we need to really pay some attention to.
And what might that be?
It's more based on formative assessment, giving feedback on a regular basis to students and working with them to help them grow, as opposed to preparing them for a final assessment or a summative assessment via standardized testing. And the results that they've been getting in Finland with basically abandoning standardized testing and working more on a formative system.
Like an organic sort of thing,
yeah.
Like as you grow, you just learn
Absolutely.
more. Okay.
And it has been very beneficial. They're ranked, I believe, #1 in the rankings around the world in terms of student achievement. So they've got to be doing something right.
Now, he's holding back on the standardized testing. I could just read your face. So you mentioned demographics play a large part in that as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think Margie's absolutely right that we have reached a point of overemphasis on standardized testing. But I think in a way we were overcorrecting for a very serious problem, and that is that we have long-standing achievement gaps in this country between affluent students and students of poverty, between minority students and white students that are frankly embarrassing. We have a long history in which our schools have essentially maintained too low expectations for students of poverty. And so the emphasis on standardized testing came in part to force schools to confront that gap and to work toward closing it over time. And so I think that part of what we're experiencing here is we went too far in that direction, but we also want to be mindful as we back away from our emphasis on standardized testing that we don't lose sight of the reasons why we started paying attention to those issues in the first place. And I think Margie's right, though, that in the long run, if we focus on classroom level teaching and formative assessment, our students will actually do much better on those standardized tests in the long run, even if we don't focus on that as our end goal, because we'll be emphasizing the things that really do make a difference in student learning and achievement in the long run.
You know, a lot of schools in the state of Kentucky suffered, and across the nation, for teaching to the test, as you referenced earlier. But it's kind of a natural something that happens when you're in these situations and you have certain benchmarks that you have to reach. Has Kentucky taken a closer look at that to correct some of those instabilities, if you will?
I'm going to defer to Gary because he's the expert on that.
Yeah, I think if you look at lots of our achievement data, it's pretty clear that we are making gradual progress in education across the state. Our college and career readiness rates are up. Our overall ACT scores are up. But there's still so much work to be done. And particularly in those areas of achievement gaps, when you look carefully at what that data suggests, even as our ACT scores have continued to rise over the last 3 years, the gap between white and black students is getting larger over that same period of time. When you consider just our white students, we're ranked around 12th or 13th among all of the states in the country. That's actually tied for last place among all of the states in the country that require all students to take the ACT. And so whether you're looking at our minority students or our white students, we still have a great deal of work yet to do to raise student achievement to the level that we want it to be.
But you remain optimistic?
I do. I think that lots of great work is being done out in the schools, and I think that we need to think about school accountability on a larger scale. I think that that the ultimate form of accountability for our schools, which would make a great contribution to improving student achievement, would be to expand parental choice and to look at opportunities for families to exercise more educational options. Because I think that competitive element has a positive effect on schools and student learning, and I think that's a mechanism by which each school is able to deliver to individual families what they need. Not every school can meet every child's needs.
Well, and regardless of income or socioeconomic level,
Absolutely.
that there would be tuition assistance available for some of those
That's
things?
right. And in disclosure, I'm on the board of directors for an organization called EdChoice Kentucky, and one of our initiatives for this year is going to be a revitalized version of what last year was House Bill 384. And what that bill would do is encourage the creation of scholarship programs that would benefit low-income families who want to send their children to non-public schools but don't have the income to be able to do that. Yeah, and that tuition assistance tax credit would encourage donations to these scholarship programs. Interestingly, there's also an element in the bill that would have benefit to foundations that support public education as well. And so it's really a win-win. We've had bipartisan support for that bill in the past, and we hope that that makes some headway this year.
Standards-based grading, what are we talking about when we say that?
Standards-based grading is having us. I'm assuming we're going to the Common Core issue,
yes.
And it's developing a set of standards that we want all students to be able to accomplish. And Common Core is one way in which we've been able to implement that particular kind of policy. Many states have already gone down the road to standards-based learning, which is identifying specific areas that and ways in which we want our students to learn and achieve. Common Core has been the impetus, I think, for all states to really grasp that policy and to run with it. There's a lot of controversy around Common Core. A lot of people think that it's the government coming in and forcing a specific curriculum down, and that's not the purpose of Common Core. Common Core is to make sure that students are having every opportunity to learn and to be successful in the classroom. And how states go about identifying those standards and how they go about implementing them is truly a state's responsibility, and it's not a government thing. So when I hear people say, oh, I don't want to talk about Common Core, or I don't think Common Core is where Kentucky needs to go, I argue against that, because I think we do need to have standards. I think Kentucky needs to have curriculum ideas that are based in standards so that our students are able to perform and compete in a global economy.
And unfortunately, on the education front, we could talk. There are so many different issues, but we're out of time. I want you both to promise you'll come back where we can talk a little bit more about Common Core.
Be great.
Thank
Love
you so
to.
much.
Thank
But
you.
you're optimistic about the future of education in our society?
Oh yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We're on the precipice of greatness.
On the precipice of greatness. We'll leave you with that. We've been talking with Dr. Gary Houchins and Dr. Margarita DeSander. That is going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. We're also going to put up some information where you can learn more about Gary's research and studies. Until next time, I'm Barbara Deeb. Thanks for joining us.